That's the best part about being the moderator. I couldn't let it go without using the gavel. Good morning. My name is Lauren Landis, and I'm the Director of the Nutrition Division at the World Food Program, and I'm really pleased to be here today. Now, unconventionally, I would like you to all pick up your phone and find WhatsApp or whatever it is you use to text, and text 2 of your friends and tell them to come join us in this beautiful room watching the sunrise. It's only on the last day of CFS that we would get such a beautiful room and such a wonderful opportunity to have this discussion. So please encourage others. I think there might be a little breakfast left upstairs, and then have them come down and join us. We are in for a dynamic panel and a fantastic conversation this morning. Be sure to tell your friends as you WhatsApp, there will be no PowerPoints here today. So it'll be genuine conversation on the issues that matter and the real how-to of how we get it done in the field. After you're done sending the messages, turn off your phone because you're really going to want to pay attention to our speakers today. This morning, we are going to explore some of the gender-transformative approaches to malnutrition. Just because I can't say it doesn't mean it's complicated. It just makes good sense. And I think you all know them, or at least some of them. And I think what we're really going to hear today are the experiences and the tools that can help us implement them wherever we work. Through my experience at the World Food Program in emergencies and with communities who are trying to build safe and nutritious food systems, I know that if we empower women, we've really empowered the entire household to provide their families, heaven forbid themselves, and teach their communities about how to eat nutritious foods and how to have a nutritious diet. I would have to say that in my mind, there's two things. There's so many things in nutrition being multisectoral, but there's really two things out there that I think really make or break whether we can conquer and address all forms of malnutrition. And I think on the one hand is the governance of a nation, the leadership we see when countries really decide that they're going to tackle malnutrition and they put the right tools and the right people in place and the right resources, they get the job done. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about in the household. When you empower women, they not only feed their families, they feed themselves, and it really makes a difference in terms of combating all forms of malnutrition. For me, it's really a chicken and an egg phenomena. We won't end malnutrition without gender equality, but we won't achieve gender equality without ending malnutrition. Just think about it for a minute. On the one hand, as mothers, farmers, teachers, and entrepreneurs, women hold the key to building a future free from malnutrition. Women and girls are essential agents in ensuring household food security, but face discrimination in access to, control over, and consumption of nutritious foods. At the same time, good nutrition allows women to reach their full potential, live healthy, happy lives, and hopefully free from disease. The correlations between gender inequality and high levels of hunger are proven all around the world. So, how do we get this done? How do we solve gender inequality and malnutrition? This is the panel that is going to show you the pathway, if not provide you with the answers. However, as you know, it's not simple. If it were simple, we would have done it by now. Nutrition solutions are multisectoral and have many stakeholders. I don't need to tell you that. Gender and nutrition, agriculture, health, they're all interlinked and integrated. and can be mutually reinforcing. To discuss these linkages, I would like to begin our panel today by inviting our first two panelists, Elizabeth Guino, close I hope, and Marlene Elias, to the stage. Here they are. Elizabeth, to my left, is a farmer from Zimbabwe who has been a fundamental part of the success of the Enterprise Project. The project supports smallholder farmers through three interlinked intermediary outcomes: increased agricultural productivity, income, and consumption of diverse and nutritious food, focusing on 11 crops and livestock value chains. Besides her participation in the Enterprise Project, Elizabeth is a member of the Bordeiro Savings and Credit Cooperative organization, which is a type of a mature savings group. The group benefited from the smart subsidy component of the program by purchasing a maize sheller and are providing some maize shelling services to local farmers. I would also like to introduce to you Marlene Elias. Marlene is a gender specialist at Bioversity International in Rome and the gender research coordinator for the CIGAR research program on forest, trees, and agroforestry. Rooted in a feminist political ecology approach, her research focuses on gender dimensions of forest management and restoration, local ecological knowledge, and forest/agri-food value chains, predominantly in West Africa and South and Central Asia. As you can see, two very impressive women who have come to speak to you today. So I want to start by asking them some very specific questions. I'll start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, how have your opportunities in farming differed from men in your community? And how has this difference affected the food security and nutrition of your household? Maybe we could start there. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Okay, good morning. The opportunities between women and men is for the men. If me, I am a man, I want to go to the market, I can't go to the market to selling my seeds, just because if I go there to the market, there's no space for me to sleep. If the men go to the market, he can spend time to sleep. If I am a woman, if I sleep outside, other people, they can come and rape me. So it is not safe for me to the market to go and selling my seeds. And for the men, if I want to go and sell cow, as a woman, I can't go there to sell a cow. If the cow is in a lorry, the cow may come out. So me as a woman, I can't take that cow in the car. So I can't go to the market. And another one for the men, if as a woman, if I plow the seeds in my house, there's a lot of job for me. I do all the job, and I'm the only one who's going to cook the food for the children. So as a woman, I do a lot of job, but the men can't do a lot of job. So I take a long time for doing a lot of job, but the children, I take care of them. If they want to go to school, I bathing all of my children, but the men didn't bath the children. So men, they are not doing a lot of job in the house. Me as a woman, I take a lot of time to take care of children. And as a woman, if I want to go and take the loans to the bank, the men, they've got the collectical. The men, they've got for example, the example of assets. The men have got the scotch cards, cows, car. Me as a woman, I didn't have all of this. So if I want to go and take the loans at the bank, I can't go and take the loans because they want collateral. So if a man wants to go and take the loans, he can go and take. So as a woman, I can't take the loans just because in the house, I don't have more things. All the things is for men, not for women.
Okay.
And the trainings, if I want to go to the trainings, the men, they said, as a woman, don't want to go for the trainings. For our region in Zimbabwe, they said, as a woman, we must not go to school. They said, men and boys, they must go to school because as a woman, you get married. And men, they want man to get married. So that's why they said, woman, you must not go to school for education. Men, they must go to school to educate. So, women, we are not doing a lot of things. Everything is for men. Everything is for men.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think you've so clearly, with your examples, really brought to life the problems of safety, of getting into the market, handling livestock, the tremendous workload of women, the problems of access to credit, and even the problems of access to education and training. So Marlene, maybe I can move to you next. And I want you to talk a little bit about this gender transformational approach. What does this really mean? How can gender transformational approaches make a difference, particularly for people like Elizabeth?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So yes, I think that sets the scene very perfectly, Elizabeth. So the types of issues that gender transformative approaches, or what I'll refer to as GTAs for short, address are precisely the issues that Elizabeth was talking about. But they do this a little bit differently than regular gender integration approaches. So the regular approaches to treating or trying to bring gender into agricultural research for development is to try to tackle some of those issues, those disparities between women and men by addressing the symptoms. So essentially by trying to facilitate more credit to women, trying to create more income generating opportunities for them, increasing their access to resources directly. But what gender transformative approaches do is to try to actually address the root causes of those inequalities. So looking at the norms that shape who is expected to do the work in the household, or the norms that shape which child is going to go to school. Is it going to be a boy child or a girl child? Norms around who should own land, norms around who should make important or strategic decisions within the household. So norms that basically stipulate what is acceptable behavior for women and men within the household, within the community, and what is the value attributed to the work that women and men do. So those are, the business as usual approaches, trying to tackle those symptoms, trying to facilitate those resources and so on to women. But within the existing structure. So they're not actually trying to challenge the structures, those informal institutions or the formal institutions that create those inequalities. And we've seen that those are actually somewhat limited in their effectiveness. So that's why these gender transformative approaches have come about really as a sort of radical proposition to try to transform or create this deeper and more enduring change. And they're premised on notions of reflexivity and of social learning. So it's really about trying to get people to dialogue, to talk about their realities, talk about their norms, and to come to their own understandings about which of those constrain their life opportunities and their livelihoods, and how they can expand their life choices by challenging some of those norms collectively. So they're done with women and with men. We know that many norms are also harmful for men, so the men are also involved in changing norms that are harmful for them and harmful for women, cultivating their own visions, collective visions about how they can lead lives that allow them to realize their full potentials together and to improve their livelihoods, those of their households and their communities. But these approaches are not only about sort of working with communities out there, it's very much also about development practitioners, development agents challenging the norms that they bring into their work and into the implementation of these approaches. So just to give an example, for example, extension services, that's sort of the classical where they've been quite unsuccessful at reaching and working with women farmers. So there's an assumption that men are the primary farmers, and as a result, women have not had the kinds of services and technologies and so on that they've needed in order to improve their own farming practices. So these are the kinds of norms that we reproduce as development actors, as practitioners, that we have to also challenge in our own work. And just a final word then on these approaches, they're not new, they've been around for some time. They've been especially used in the fields of sexual and reproductive health and rights. And they've been shown to be quite effective in those fields, changing, for example, lowering incidences of gender-based violence. They're relatively new to agriculture, especially used in agricultural research for development, so there's a lot of learning that can and should occur between fields in trying to implement these in our fields.
Thank you, Marlene. So really getting at the root causes, challenging the norms, but not challenging the institutions, really focused on social learning. So what does this mean? Elizabeth, let's go back to you. Can you give us a couple of examples of maybe how your household would be different if you had the same opportunities of men? And then, in your words, what is needed to effectively change or improve the current situation that you face? First question, and then second. Maybe I spoke too quickly.
If I am a man in Gurube, I can do agriculture, and for example, for agriculture, conservation agriculture, and another one, I can get the loans to the bank if we have the same opportunities with men. And do different types of projects in the area, and I can go to the trainings, doing all the trainings. For example, of the trainings, girls trainings, financial literacy training, entrepreneurship training. And I can do the projects, different projects in the house. For example, project of livestock, project of broilers, and I can buy the tractor as a man for plowing big yields, and I can do the demo plots for farming as a group to improve the nutrition of the kids.
Yes.
The second one.
The second part of the question, what is needed to effectively change or improve your current situation?
To improve my situation as a woman, we must do different types of projects. For example, project of broilers, project of livestock, project of pigs, and to educate us. That's because women not educate. So we must educate, and doing the trainings like GAUS. GAUS, the meaning of GAUS is Gender Action Learning System, and doing trainings of financial literacy. For financial literacy, I get how to save my money, how to budget my money, how to do my gross margin, how to save my money if I grow up, for planning for an old man, old age. If I get older, I must save something that I want, what I am going to go and sell. Because when I get old, I didn't do any job that I do as I'm young. So I must, in financial literacy, I must buy, for example, buy cow, even car. That things is for me, for when I'm not getting old, I'm going to sell all of these things. So we must do trainings, educate, projects, and buy farming assets. Farming assets is better for me just because I've got children. The children, when they grow up, they're going to use that assets of farming. So it's better for them, for a good life, to use them.
Now, there's some really practical tools, really understanding how to do the finance, the budget, planning for old age, understanding which assets to buy. I think these very practical tools have got to be part of the equation. But Marlene, can you tell us, from your experience, what are some of the examples of other tools that can be applied? And now, using the acronym, does implementing GTAs require new or different skills than those typically mobilized?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in fact, they also do include some of the tools that Elizabeth was just speaking about, and they're very much about unlocking the opportunities for women to access the types of, or the possibilities for women to access the type of opportunities that Elizabeth is referring to. So there are many different tools. They're they've been detailed. There's a lot of guidance in terms of how to implement some of these gender transformative approaches, or GTAs. So for those who would wish to know more or who would wish to try it, there's a lot of guidance out there. I'll name a few just so that you have a sense of who's been working in this field. So for example, Oxfam, Novib, and Linda Mayou developed this gender action learning system, which Elizabeth just referred to. Helen Keller International developed Nurturing Connections. Promundo and CARE developed Journeys of Transformation. So there are various types of tools, though I would say they're methodologies. So it's not just about a tool, but it's really about a whole implementation process, and that brings together several tools in a sort of, in a logical way to move us through this process of reflection and learning that I was mentioning before. So they have a number of common features. They're participatory methodologies, so they draw on participatory action research and participatory action learning. Well, it's the essence of those methodologies. They're cycles of dialogue, action, and then self-reflection. So they're really processes. They're not one-offs. It's a process. It can take 4, 6, 12 months to implement. It's implemented in a series of activities and exercises with households, with communities, as I said before, with women and men. And the idea, again, is to really help women and men develop their aspirations, to see that their norms are not fixed, that they're able to modify them, to try different actions and different practices that are going to move them towards a greater gender equality. So there's an emphasis on trying to promote communication, greater communication within the household, more equitable decision-making within the household, better or more equitable sharing of domestic tasks as well. And they're used, these approaches are used in combination with other types of agricultural interventions. So they're not usually just a sort of standalone stream, but they're really integrated within a larger sort of package of agricultural innovation and interventions. So just to pick up again on the GALS, the Gender Action Learning System, methodology, to give you a very brief sense of what is included in there. It starts with building the capacities of the implementing staff and of local or community champions who are going to be really taking a lead in implementing these methodologies in their communities. And then there's a series of activities, so participatory visioning, where women and men come up with or develop a vision for themselves in 5 years. What do they want to be doing? Where do they want to be? And then they identify opportunities and constraints along this path, along their journey towards achieving that vision. And then there's a gender balance tree. So when they see these, when they identify these constraints, several of them will be gendered constraints for women. And then they move into the gender balance tree, where they're looking at how labor is distributed within the household, at how expenses are distributed, at ownership, who owns what, and so on. And the idea, again, is to recognize, to bring value and recognition to the work that women are doing, but also to lead to a more equitable balance of work within the household. And every activity ends with a type of action plan or some kind of actions that participants will be carrying out before the next activity. And when you come, or when they come to the next session, then it begins with there's a period of reflection on what's happened since the last activity and that one. So it's again this cycle: dialogue, action, and reflection. And then there are subsequent, several subsequent types of sessions and activities in that methodology. So the second question was around skills and if different skills are needed. So yes, absolutely. These methodologies are about doing different things, but also doing things differently. So you do need different skills. You obviously need good skills in facilitation, facilitating processes of self-reflection, behavior change communication skills, and that can be a challenge. So finding good facilitators and also strengthening the capacities of facilitators. That's not just for these approaches, but for participatory approaches in general, that can be a challenge. It's also, a challenge in terms of having organizations, implementing organizations reflect on their own norms, becoming aware of our own biases in relationship to also the implementation of these GTAs. Learning to value different perspectives, different ways of learning, promoting horizontal learning. So it's really a learning in how we work and how we with the assumptions, the norms, the biases that we bring to our work. So it's a shift also in how we think about capacity building. It's not just about learning new skills, but it's really about shifting mental models. So it's really a more sort of transformative learning. And that requires bringing traditional more traditional training approaches where we're looking, for example, at content, at knowledge acquisition around the basis of these GTAs, what is their conceptual basis, and bringing that together with learning by doing, practical learning. We also need new skills in order to be able to monitor gender transformative approaches. So we're looking at monitoring changes in gender norms, which are obviously complex. They're immaterial changes. They're changes that will happen over quite some time. They're non-linear. So this is all sort of, we need to find a way, we need to improve our ways, our measures of monitoring these changes, bringing different methods together, qualitative, quantitative, and also encouraging communities to be really lead actors in this monitoring, because the monitoring is really also it's learning. It's part of the part of the basis of action research or participatory action learning is the learning component, and this monitoring figures into that. So there's also learning that needs to be done on our part in terms of merging different knowledge systems and really being able to hand over the control and the reins of monitoring, but also of the larger process to communities, something that we're not always very good at. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I think we are definitely going to have a lot of questions on the participatory skills and methodologies, the skills, and of course the monitoring techniques. And I promise you that we'll have time to take those questions. I want you to give a big round of applause, particularly for Elizabeth, who was very, very brave to get up here and really share some very strong experiences from her life here with you today. We will have an opportunity to come back and ask her questions, but I want to move on to the second set of the panel. So thank you, Elizabeth. Don't move, stay right there. As Kawinzi always tells me, who's the director of gender at the World Food Program, it's not just about girls, Lauren, it's also about boys. So in our second half of the panel, we're going to talk to the boys. I want to introduce to you probably two men who you've met before or definitely talked to this week. First of all, we have Dan Irvine, who is also the mastermind behind this workshop, I think, today. He is the Senior Director of Health and Nutrition at World Vision. In his position, he advises the development of interventions and programs focused on primary health care in developing, fragile, and humanitarian context. He is an advocate of social capital and social accountability and advised the development of World Vision's core social accountability approach. Wow. Under Dan's leadership, World Vision is developing a gender-transformative framework to address malnutrition and gender inequality, to which I witnessed at the launch. I witnessed the launch of the draft at the Women Deliver conference in Canada earlier this year. In addition, we have Andrew Zeppa, which I probably pronounced wrong, who is a partner at Gallup. He leads Gallup's public release projects in the EMEA and APAC regions. So I'm assuming that at least one of those is Asia. Andrew is a principal of Gallup's International Policy and Development Practice and leads Gallup's partnership with United Nations agencies. This includes the measurement of two Sustainable Development Goal indicators, tracking global food security, our favorite, SDG 2.1, with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, Voices of the Hungry Team Project and Modern Slavery with a consortium including the International Labor Organization and the Walk Free Foundation. Other topics include diet quality, food safety, risk, vaccines, water access, mitigation, refugee rights, gender equality, well-being, and mental health. He's pretty much got them all, and he also works with the World Food Program. So let me get started on the questions for this part of the panel. So first, Dan, what can our community expect from World Vision's work on a gendered framework for nutrition?
Thank you, Lauren. First, let me say what a great pleasure it is to see so many of you here in the audience today on this early Friday morning on the tail end of the CFS event. We weren't totally sure that you would all come out for this, but we are thrilled to see you there. It's exciting. So World Vision, over the last month, starting earlier this year, created this ambition to do better in terms of the inclusion of looking at transformational gender issues within our food security and nutrition programming. We started a literature review process early in the year to look specifically at the linkages between gender empowerment and nutrition outcomes. And I have to say, to be clear at the front end, we don't find that evidence base to be exceptionally robust. And there are good reasons for that, because the pathways between the transformational gender level issues that Elizabeth and Marilyn were just speaking to and the linkage to nutrition outcomes are not direct, they're very indirect, if you will. So the evidence base is not vast, but there is evidence. It's quite clear at the same time that gender inequality makes women and girls more vulnerable to developmental issues in terms of educational opportunity, poverty, poor working situation. And we find some very compelling points, for example, that women's relative status to men and girls' secondary education accounts for half of the total increase in reductions in child underweight. So that's extremely significant and important for us to consider.
You better say that again. Yeah?
So, I'll say it again.
Yeah, because it's important.
Women's relative, it's a combination of 2 points. Women's relative status to men and girls' secondary education account for half of the decrease, I might have said increase, half of the decrease in total child underweight.
All right.
You should know that.
It's an important one. I'm going to use that.
You should use it. We'll give you the reference in the citation. So, working from there to conceptualize the deep pathways between gender empowerment and nutrition outcomes, we've been looking at both nutrition frameworks and models and gender empowerment frameworks and models and blending them together, including, for example, UNICEF framework for malnutrition, Spring's framework for adolescent girls' nutrition, and then on the gender side, Kabir's empowerment process, Engel's care processes, putting them together, and then within this blended conceptual framework, mapping out both the nutrition and the gender empowerment quantitative indicators, and on the gender side of those indicators, looking at sets relating to psychosocial elements, to economic enablers, to the empowerment points like women's decision-making, and the environmental enabling factors, that address women's empowerment. Now, ultimately, we want to take that modeling and refine it down to a field-friendly tool to pilot in a couple of countries within the coming months, actually, that enables field-level implementers to be able to assess not only the gender-responsive types of issues that we've been addressing over the last years, but more deeply into the transformational type issues so that the field staff can begin to identify those issues and understand their linkages to the nutrition issues that they're also assessing and make those connections. And most critically, so that they can then consider the prioritization of interventions against those transformational GTA level issues alongside the work that we've typically been doing in nutrition and food security programming. We want our SDG 2 investments to be not only gender responsive, but gender transformational. I think Elizabeth gave us a great example with her sharing. And, you know, providing training for women in farming, I would call a responsive intervention. But making sure that all of the girls in Elizabeth's community have the opportunity to go through school, primary and secondary education. Making sure that all the women in the community have legal rights to the kinds of capital assets that Elizabeth was talking about, I would call transformational. Making sure that we end gender-based violence in the community, I would call transformational. And until we're able to really address both those responsive and those transformational issues, we're simply not going to be able to eliminate malnutrition.
Okay. So really you see the development of this blended conceptual framework coming into a field tool that can be used on a pilot basis in a number of countries, then identifying those transformational issues related to gender, and then applying them to nutrition. I think that sounds like a very, very good plan and a very important tool. We're going to delve down further into that, but first I want to bring Andrew into the conversation. So Gallup has been working on a lot of things related to food security. And Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about the Gender Equality for Food Security survey and give us an idea of the scale and dimensions of gender and what this will be looking at?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so very much for the opportunity to present this work. A huge amount of effort from a huge variety of different individuals, organizations have gone into getting us to this point so far. Before I start digging into the Gender Equality for Food Security measurement framework, I'd like to ask a quick question. How many of you are familiar with this publication, The State of Food Insecurity in the World? Quick show of hands. Put them really high up if you... How many of you have actually read it? So probably about a quarter. I see a few of the authors of it there at the back and say, I'm sure they're intimately familiar. So obviously within the State of Food Insecurity in the World report, for the first time, there's been this discussion around moderate food insecurity as well as severe food insecurity. There's that 2 billion people figure in there. And for me, probably one of the most interesting elements around this 2 billion figure is, who are those 2 billion people? And what does the gender dimension of those 2 billion look like? Because the Food Insecurity Experience Scale, this SDG 2.1.2 indicator, is implemented using surveys. So in the same way that a country can measure employment rates using nationally representative surveys, countries now have the ability to measure food insecurity using parallel sets of surveys. The beauty of that is that when you do those surveys on an individual level, you can actually disaggregate the data. It sounds like a fairly small nuance, but obviously, as many of you in the room will be aware, not a lot of surveys actually do individual level data collection. Often it's head of household, which therefore doesn't allow you to understand the gender inequities of whatever you're trying to measure. But through both our partnership with FAO, through the Voices of the Hungry, plus also the huge number of countries which are collecting food insecurity data. For kind of a seminal first time, FAO and the Rome-based agencies were able to put forward these global figures of moderate and severe food insecurity disaggregated by gender. A bit of a flagship watermark there. So globally, we know that 24% of men and 25.4% of women are food insecure across the world. So we're discussing both moderate and severe food insecurity here. And so I recognize that the panel's focused on nutrition, so I need to draw that dotted line between moderate food insecurity and nutrition. The report itself states that with regard to moderate food insecurity, these individuals may not suffer from hunger, but rather suffer from lack of access to nutritious and safe foods, putting them at greater risk of various forms of malnutrition. You look at some of the other chapters of the report, and you can actually start to see the interlinks between moderate food insecurity and the rise of NCDs in high-income countries, and also the links between more traditional anthropometric measures of nutrition. So, why am I bringing all of this up? Because this food insecurity experience scale is at the heart of what the gender equality for food security measurement is. We're trying to understand and unpick why women across the world are more food insecure than men. So essentially in every single region, that 1.4% equates to 3.7 so the 1.4% of 3.76 billion women is the equivalent of 52.7 million women across the world who are more food insecure than men. I think if there's a real, if we're going to actually create and achieve SDG 2, that's something that we really need to keep top of mind. And the fact that, once again, to Sophie, even controlling for education, poverty status, and degrees of urbanicity, women are still 10% more likely to be food insecure than men, revealing other subtler forms of discrimination. So this whole overarching framework led to this whole discussion around how can we better understand these subtler forms of discrimination and look at the interrelationships between those and this SDG 2.1.2 measure of food insecurity. So that's what we're trying to achieve, and that was the original call to arms of this collaboration between WFP's gender team, FAO's statistics team, and Gallup. So WFP's gender team led the, I suppose, the framework development, undertaking a thorough literature review in the same way that Dan and his colleagues did. So looking at both normative frameworks, theoretical frameworks, and also the numerous global gender indices that are out there. We identified 5 key dimensions which are absolutely pertinent for this gender equality for food security framework: decision-making, financial self-sufficiency, freedom from violence, reproductive freedom, and unpaid labor. We then convened a technical advisory group of some of the world's leading experts, both from civil society, academia, government, and other members of the UN family, in order to help identify what specific dimensions and what specific questions we need to ask within those specific categories. We also reviewed some of the pre-existing big global data sets. So, for example, with one of Gallup's other collaborations with the World Bank, we measured global financial inclusion. Once again, surprise, surprise, we see women being left behind, with a 7% global gender gap in financial inclusion. So men, 72% financial inclusion, financially included, women, only 65%. We looked at some of the SDG 16 indicators Gallup also collects. So for example, there's an item which is, do you feel safe walking alone at night in the area or community you live? 1/3 of women across the world do not feel safe walking alone at night. We heard similar stories from the other panelists today. That's versus only 1/4 of men. And so identifying this long list of items which we could test in a rigorous and robust way using multi-country cognitive testing. So ultimately these items look at resources, agency, physical integrity. We don't have specific dimensions around direct education, time use, or skills or training, because we're trying to keep it very simple, very practical. So any organization who wishes to actually just add a number of items into their specific surveys to add a more gender nuanced dimension to that is able to. So As I mentioned, we took this through a rigorous cognitive testing process in Ecuador, Indonesia, Portugal, Senegal, Syria, Ukraine, and Zambia, where we were testing for specific dimensions such as comprehension. Do people understand what we're asking? Retrieval. Are they able to actually retrieve the information that we're asking within the time periods requested within the questionnaires? Judgment. When we're asking those individuals those questions, are they actually anchoring onto the same cognitive construct that we're looking to actually measure? And then response. How were individuals actually responding to these questions so we weren't getting false positives or false negatives? And then finally, went through an institutional review board before doing multi-country implementation through the World Poll. So the first iteration was in 7 countries: Bangladesh, Myanmar, Nigeria, Tajikistan, the UK, and Zambia. Once again, reflective of countries across an array of different levels of economic development, reflective of the fact that women's empowerment and food insecurity isn't just a low-income issue. It's something which affects individuals and women across the entire world. And so, essentially, have been doing a rigorous analysis process in order to identify which of that initial set of 25 questions within that gender empowerment dimension are really the most effective in order to actually help understand the interlinks between women's empowerment and food security. Following a fairly detailed review, we're now implementing another series of surveys in additional 7 countries in order to actually really hone down this instrument into something which is effective, which functions very well, and is as slick and as streamlined as it can be, in order so it can be adopted by as many people as possible. So that's, in a fairly broad strokes, what we've been doing and how we've done it.
Andrew, I think there are going to be a lot of questions, and you'll get to really drill down on some of the details, because that's really fascinating. But I want to go back to Dan a little bit, back to the field. We were up high at the global level, and maybe down to some of the practical issues that people are thinking about. These are my last 2 questions, and then we're going to open it up to you. We're going to have a good amount of time. We're pretty much on schedule to ask questions before the closing remarks. So please think of your questions, because I know you have questions. It's been such a rich panel. So Dan, if these gender empowerment interventions are cross-cutting, right? That helps us to understand across the programming that we're working on. So sectorally agnostic, shall we say. Should food and nutrition sector resources be allocated to them, or should these investments come from a dedicated gender empowerment initiative? And what would that look like?
Thanks, Lauren. First of all, I want to underscore something that Andrew said. You know, the fact that 1/3 of the women in the world feel insecure. Well, 1/3 of the women of the world feel insecure because 1/3 of the women of the world have physically experienced sexual and gender-based violence. You know, this is a very real factor, and it underscores the point of our discussion today. Something like that violence, that gender-based violence, which is not typically a focal point of the nutrition and food security community's work, actually has a deep impact on nutritional outcomes through a variety of pathways that are in terms of mental health and mental health outcomes, and we're even finding intergenerational genetic ramifications of social situations and violence that impact the nutrition of young kids. Now, your question, I think, is a great one, and it's something that I mentioned at the launch in Vancouver at the Women Deliver conference, because for me, I think it's fundamental to our discussions here this week. If we're able to understand the significant relevance of these gender issues to food security and gender, are we prepared as the nutrition and food security community to invest our resources into the kinds of interventions that will address those issues? I think it's highly provocative. If you think about our folks on the ground, in the field, perhaps even in our global offices, you know, we're not generally allocating significant resources to girls' education, to ending violence against women and girls, to, you know, all the social dimensions that we've been talking about here. Are we prepared to do that? Moving forward, we simply have to realize that without a transformation towards gender equality, we're not going to realize the nutrition food security goals that we have. Here's another statistic for you. For example, the provision of universal primary schooling for girls in sub-Saharan Africa alone can increase agricultural productivity by 25%. That's profound. This is what Jeffrey Sachs was talking about on, I think it was Tuesday in his plenary address, actually, girls' education. Well, that's just stark. Girls' education alone increase agricultural productivity 25%. So if you're a minister of agriculture or an agriculture nutrition policy maker and you're looking at your toolkit and your investment options, and in particular, you're looking at them from a cost-benefit perspective, would you not choose to make that investment? You know, but the complexity, so typically we'll say, well, you know, it's the Ministry of Education, or it's Ministry of Social Welfare, it's other people who are going to do this. I think that's not enough. I think that if we recognize some of these cross-cutting fundamental investments that have multifold returns, we have to work together with our sectoral partners and jointly invest in them, because the outcomes are so significant for us.
Okay. So one last question for you, Andrew. Even though we just got the broad brushstrokes of what we're able to find out from this survey, what we're able to understand about inequality and gender, what do you think this type of survey can mean for evidence-based advocacy, accountability, transformative changes, both for individuals on the ground, but also for organizations, agencies, that kind of thing?
So I'd say that one of the biggest challenges we face as a community is inertia. Things are done as they have been done, and they will continue to be done like that because nobody else is making either a case to change the way that business as usual is normally done. And so providing an envelope and a framing with which to reframe these discussions. So that finding around the 10%, that women are 10% more food insecure than men across the world, that's a piece of knowledge which provides us a lever with which to change business as usual. And so ultimately, that's where we're trying to go with this measurement framework, to actually really show those clear pathways between women's empowerment, food security, and improved nutritional outcomes. And so through the provision of a robust instrument which we can show and demonstrate works across countries, cultures, regions, languages, which can be added to any organization surveys, whether they're in civil society, whether they're in the government, in order to actually provide a global public good to change the way business is done as usual. And so by having this data, by reframing these discussions, hopefully we can actually create that momentum in order to create change.
Perfect. New data to help us reframe the dialogue, stop the business as usual. Now, what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity. I'd like to bring all of our panelists back up to the table and allow the audience to ask their questions. We have, I think before our closing remarks, we have a good 15, 20 minutes for questions. So I turned it over to you. You can ask your question of any of our panel members today. Who would like to ask the first question? I know Coinzy has a question if there aren't any, but I'll look to the, oh, I see a hand in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the excellent presentations. My name is Ann Keppel. I'm in the statistics division here in FAO, and I'm actually on the Voices of the Hungry team, so I had the pleasure of working with Andy. I just wanted to make an observation and maybe a provocation that maybe doesn't make any sense coming from a person in the statistics division. But I think it was fascinating, the breadth of voices. So I just wanted to observe how valuable Elizabeth's contributions were. And then there was this sort of more intermediate level of sort of community and national from Bioversity, and then the more, global from Andy. And I wanted to observe how all of those are important, and how in the statistics division, it's always a frustration to be working always at this global level. And I just wanted to say that it's really important to give voice to the people behind the numbers and to have those voices be heard, and to avoid putting too much emphasis and value on the global numbers, and to be aware of the things that they're able to hide as well. So when Andy points to the subtlety, the subtle, more nuanced things behind gender and food insecurity, it's really the sort of local level, the qualitative research that can really get at that in a better way. So I want to make an argument in favor of, yes, the global numbers are really important and can help frame things. I completely agree. But let's also give value to the qualitative research and the importance of, work at the national level of national statistics offices and universities. Thanks.
Thanks so much. The voice behind the numbers. Can I take two more? And then we have the chair of the CFS, who is with us today, and will close the sessions. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Ergin Manem. I'm policy officer in social statistics and gender here in FAO. My question is for Andrew. I'm a great fan of the Gallup data, particularly on food security, and because for us this is of enormous value, and I use those data basically every day. The problem is that many countries do not recognize these surveys, no? And this is a problem because this means that also the governments of these countries are probably not using this data. And it's very likely that in many of the countries, these data, there are no other data. So either they have to use this one to say something about gender inequality and gender disparity, or so what efforts are you putting in place, or if you also see a role that a greater role that FAO could play to make sure that these data are recognized by the country's statistical offices, and then as a consequence will be of greater use by the governments and national statistics.
Thank you very much. I want to take one more before the panel answers. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Hajnalka Petric from FAO. And I would like to thank for all the panelists for the excellent presentations. And I have a forward-looking comment regarding the recent endorsement of the CFS multi-year program of work, which has a work stream on gender equality and women's empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition, which is a proposal that has been submitted by the 3 RBAs together with the government of Spain and received ultimately a huge support from the other member states. And I'm very happy that Mr. Mario Arvelo is here, the chair of the committee, and he can certainly tell us about how difficult it is sometimes to get through the message of how important gender equality is for food security and nutrition objectives, and how much gender inequalities influence the FSN outcomes. So I think that the experiences that we have heard and the work done by World Vision International and Gallup and the other UN agencies, but also countries will be tremendously important to contribute to the formulation of these voluntary guidelines and come up with really an instrument, a global instrument that can help moving forward the agenda of gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment. Thank you.
Okay, since that was a comment rather than a question, I'm going to let Kawinzi ask the last question. I'm sure it's a question.
Can I just make a comment to say what? No, I will ask a question. I will ask a question. But I just wanted to say what an incredible panel. Seriously, gender balanced, really connecting the stories of Elizabeth to solutions. That is fantastic. Now, and then I just want to say this. When we talk to donors, they say, show us the evidence. I mean, donors are saying, don't count girls, or don't say you are feeding 55 million women or girls. Show us the evidence. So I'm glad that with Andrew's, the results which are coming from the Gallup, now I think we can put in a package to move forward. So I just wondered, the question is, how can we combine what Marlena said, what Elizabeth has said, what Dana said, what Andrew has said, that to make a package to sell to the donors and to the governments? That is my question. Thank you.
Always a tough question. Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Andrew, because I think you had a couple of specific comments. And then if we have the time, we'll run down the panel for any last pressing responses.
So one of the questions was around kind of the recognition of Gallup data by national statistics offices. And so ultimately, Gallup isn't trying to replace the role of national statistics offices. Ultimately, the work that we do sits as kind of an interim. So for example, you look at the work of the Voices of the Hungry team and the Food Insecurity Experience Scale. By the fact that we could implement that in over 140 countries 6 years ago, actually before the initial conversations around the SDGs, helped provide the evidence that food insecurity could actually be measured at an individual and a household level on a robust cross-country valid basis. And so since then, since actually bringing it within the SDG framework, Gallup's work is essentially a placeholder until those national statistics offices do actually take that challenge on themselves. And so over the course of the past 5 years, we've actually seen, I think it's 101 countries now adopt the food insecurity experience scale within their own national surveys. And so we see a reducing role for Gallup, but that was by design, that was by intent. So ultimately, the work that we're doing is designed to be a catalyst, to bring everyone to a common understanding and a common framing of how to explore these concepts of food insecurity. But ultimately, if there is going to be real change, countries need to own these data themselves and actually be producing that data. That said, FAO have been working tirelessly to actually engage with national statistics offices. And so earlier this year, the data from the past 6 years from, I believe, 76 countries were made publicly available. And that was the partnership between FAO and Gallup in terms of all that data collection. So for all of you who are data savvy in the room, you can actually go onto the FAO website and download gender disaggregated food insecurity data for 76 countries. Ultimately, very much the objective is for countries to take ownership themselves, but until they do, there's a role for Gallup to provide those interim data to enable that those global estimates and to enable that global reframing of some of these most important issues. And then in relation to the second question, I think we all need to sit down together and work out how we can actually create an integrated, structured, offering maybe, which takes the best of the work that both Dan's undertaken and Gallup and the other colleagues on the panel today.
And I'm sure you have some thoughts on that.
Just very quickly.
Sure, very quickly.
To agree with Andrew, and I love your question, you know, I'm a fan of non-duplication of our activities because it's a complete waste of resources. So it's been really exciting for me to hear about what FAO WFP have been doing with Gallup and Andrew's work. And we've already started talking about sharing information between what we're doing, and I have the full intention of leveraging that work into the operationalization and the tool creation for folks on the ground. And we have a great opportunity in World Vision to leverage our field-based programs for these kinds of initiatives and to begin to generate the evidence base that we can then share with the policymakers and the people allocating resources, which is key to changing this culture and this equation. So.
Thank you. I want to let Elizabeth have the last word. So Marlene, did you have a burning issue to end with?
Okay, well, maybe just to add, because I realize I didn't say this before, but that the business as usual approaches that I was referring to, and these gender transformative approaches are not mutually exclusive, and that they can be combined in a very productive way. So just to give an example, in India there have been interventions recognizing that women in times of food insecurity are often, and even in regular times, often the ones who eat last, who don't get the same, the portions that give them the same nutrition as the rest of the family, and so on. So interventions have focused on working with women to tell them, well, while you cook, you can snack while you cook. Don't wait until, everyone's been fed to eat, so that you get nutrition, you get nutritious foods without necessarily challenging those norms of women, eating at the end. But then with the gender transformative approach, you would also say, well, why is it that women eat last? And is that the most, sort of productive way of running your household and so on? So I think they do really go hand in hand, and it takes a long time for normative change to happen. So we don't want to forget about also, working with those those business as usual approaches. But just to say that the changes that would happen with these gender transformative approaches, yeah, they can be hard to measure. And so we also don't want to put all our faith in only waiting for, for the kinds of measurements that we expect. So I think that the integrated offering is not only nice to have, but it's really a must-have, and that we have to create that together. So hopefully we're moving towards, or we can move towards something in that shape.
Marlene, thank you. Before we finish with Elizabeth, I want to close this event by allowing the chair of the CFS, who is going between events today, who has been able to join us, formally close this event. I think at the end of CFS, you all know him well, His Excellency Mario Avelo, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of the Dominican Republic to FAO, IFAD, and WFP. But we all know him as the chair of CFS. It's over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll only be chair of CFS until this afternoon, so you'll better go back to Mario. Of course, Lauren is a colleague and a friend for many years. We worked together on CFS issues before she joined WFP. I would like first to thank our partners who invested in organizing this event: FAO, WFP, World Vision, IFAD, the EU, and the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. Many thanks to you, Lauren, for your moderation, and the panelists, and a shout out to Elizabeth. I had someone amongst you telling me in real time what was going on, so you just saw me come in a few minutes ago, but I know what you've been up to. Making progress on gender equality and women's empowerment are essential elements to achieve food security and nutrition, eradicate poverty, and in fact, gender equality and the empowerment of women is an absolute precondition to break the cycle of poverty and hunger and achieve all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, not just SDG 2 of zero hunger, but SDG 1 of zero poverty and all of the others. CFS was proud to launch our gender, food security and nutrition policy in 2011. That was CFS 37. In our policy, we resolved to ensure women's participation in decision-making concerning their food security and nutrition and to promote their leadership. At our 2017 Gender-Focused Forum, we affirmed our policy and called for specific member state actions, including the eradication of gender stereotypes and structural discrimination as a precondition to address power imbalances. Although in recent years we have seen intensified efforts to address gender inequalities in agriculture, women continue to face greater challenges than men in access to and control over productive resources. These are structural, systemic obstacles that we have and we must overcome. Evidence shows that conventional gender strategies, important as they are, tend to treat the symptoms of gender inequalities, such as lack of access to resources and services, but they often fail to address the underlying structural impediments to gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. That's why I shouldn't come up with my own stuff aside from the script, because it was in the script just a few phrases down. These structural impediments are core. They lie in discriminatory social norms, attitudes, behaviors, and practices that regard women and girls as inferior to men and boys. If we are serious about gender equality, we have to move beyond reaching and benefiting women to challenging and addressing the negative norms and practices that cause gender inequalities. And here I will also say that, as Ms. Petrix mentioned, she's one of the driving forces of the, behind the gender workstream in the MyPow. The MyPow is a multi-year program of work. We wouldn't be the real UN if we didn't use acronyms for everything. So this MyPow for the years 2020 to 23 is contemplating 4 major work streams that are on data collection and analysis, because we need to know what's happening, including with regards to women and girls, in order to advise on policies. Also on inequalities, and that goes to the core of what I'm just saying, the structural, systemic inequalities between women, girls, men, and boys. So women, girls, men, and boys. And also youth, and that includes the girls. And most importantly, because we're aiming for voluntary guidelines, which is just below international obligatory, mandatory law, but above policy guidance is voluntary guidelines in the legalese of the UN system on gender. So the actual title is Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment with regards to food security and nutrition. Because of that, I call on member states again, even though there are a few government representatives here, but this is a standard line because it is national governments that need to take action within their jurisdictions, enacting laws and regulations and bringing all of these policies into concrete reality. So I call member states and everyone involved in this discussion, in these policy dialogues, to push for placing, identifying specific budgets to finance the gender policies and frameworks, and note that we cannot underestimate the importance of political will to foster the cultural change needed to fully realize women's rights. Nothing short of this commitment will move the needle. Women must have equal access to every form of resource. We should be unequivocal on this point. It is a simple question of human rights for half of the world's population. It was on 10 December 1948 that the United Nations approved the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it was a woman, a Dominican woman, named Minerva Bernardino. She's not as famous as others, but she was a trailblazer, a diplomat from the Dominican Republic that in one meeting, such as the ones that we've been having all this week when they were, the diplomats were discussing this Universal Declaration, the title was of the rights of man. And she said, she stood up and raised the Dominican flag and said, whoa, what's that about? It should be, it should be human rights, not the rights of man. And some tried to shout her down, saying that man, because of linguistic convention, included men and women, and she insisted, and she prevailed. And she's one of 4 women out of 147 delegates that signed the original UN Charter. Her signature is there. You can Google that, and you will find that, that this is so. So let's not forget that women comprise about 50% of the agricultural workforce in developing countries, and they are critical agents of change in the fight against rural poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. To all food security, nutrition, and agriculture practitioners on the ground, I call on you also to improve your gender analysis practice, ensuring that we always consider the root causes of women's disempowerment and inequality and address them squarely in our programmatic investments. Those investments must respond to the specific needs of women. We must all recognize our mutual accountability for these actions, and we must monitor our progress. These needs are fundamental to our food and nutrition goals, as they are across the SDGs. Because the goal of gender equality is so cross-cutting, we might be tempted to assume that someone else will work on it. Someone else will make the needed investments This is something we've heard during this week. Some have said, well, let UN Women work on that. Let I don't know, some Martian work on that. No, it is us. In each and every aspect where women are lacking in rights and in structures and in access, we need to make that fight, especially if we do it here for food security and nutrition. This is our job here in Rome. That is, oops, I keep going away from my scripted notes. It is true that our sectoral colleagues will need to invest, but our community must do our part. Our investments and the resources entrusted to us must equally be applied. The next time we come together to discuss gender, food, and nutrition, it should be to measure our investments and our progress, this monitoring part that I just mentioned. The policy is clear, and what we need now is action. This is my challenge to all of us today, and I take personal responsibility for the objective. And I also will pass this on to my successor, Mr. Tien Sin of Thailand, who will be taking over this afternoon. As we are at the last day of CFS 46, I thank you all for participating and for your commitment. Enjoy the final sessions today, and take the joint wisdom of our community back out to your work. Let's be the generation that changes the global culture to realize women's rights. Food security and nutrition depend on it. And as I take my leave, I am going to the Red Room, where I will be opening the youth special event. So as soon as you wrap up, this is the formal closing, but you will continue discussing. As soon as you wrap up, cross over to the Red Room, because we have many girls and boys, young women and men that are keeping this light on and pointing to the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. As you can see, a lot of passion. Mario has been an excellent chair of the CFS, but I'll be glad to go back to calling him just Ambassador Mario. So, as he runs off to talk to the youth, I would like to give Elizabeth the last final word today. It has been an excellent panel, and we've heard from all of the different perspectives, but maybe you can give us the last words of wisdom as we go forward.
I just want to thank Enterprise for coming here in Rome. It's my first time to coming here, so I was happy just because of Enterprise. Last time, I was in Kenya in February to go and learning about circles just because of Enterprise. So I just want to give a big thank you to Enterprise for training me all the trainings of living, how to live with my family. So I just want to thank them for giving me a big knowledge for me. If they give me a knowledge, I give the other woman in Zimbabwe for that technology that I saw here in Roma. So I've got right now, I take care for my children, all the responsibility for my children just because of Enterprise. And right now, my children eat a variety of foods with proteins, carbohydrates, iron and zinc, just because of Enterprise. I just want to be a big thank you for the Enterprise. It's giving me a lot of knowledge for me. I just want to thank you all for coming here. And right now, I'm an honorable woman in my neighborhood just because of Enterprise. And right now, I'm a productive farmer just because of Enterprise. So I just want to say to Enterprise, in Zimbabwe, the other women, they are not like me. So we want more trainings in Zimbabwe so everyone gets the knowledge of nutrition and get the knowledge of gender. Even the men, they must have that training for gender. So if they give the trainings of gender, there's no violence in our country. We live peaceful in our country. So Enterprise, I just want to thank you very much for me.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks all the panel members for a very successful last presentation on the morning of CFS. Thank you all. And I get to use the gravel again, right? Yes.